terror. 20, 21. You can't breathe.
You know what he's liable to do?
Yes.
Well, let's get down there and break it up then.
Oh, what good would it do? 2 days, he'll be back again just like before.
Not this time. I'm gonna teach that moron a lesson.
You're wasting your time.
Just you wait and see. When I get through with him...
You're wasting your time.
Papa didn't do it.
We did everything we possibly could not to hurt him. But we had to defend ourselves.
Defend yourselves? The man had 21 bullet wounds in him.
Don't worry, Mrs. Ritter. Bubba's not gone. He's playing the hiding game.
Mr. Hazelrig, we can't just sit around and do it. Go home. You've done enough already. Just go home and keep your mouth shut.
Well, what do you know? You're here 1 minute, and the next one, Hocker ground himself up in his brush machine last night.
You don't fool me, Hazelrig, not for a minute. You may think you got the rest of them fooled, but I know exactly what you are.
This is Hans Manship from A Day of Judgment and House of Death on the Hysteria Continues.
And indeed you are. Welcome back to the Hysteria Continues, and this time it's the Dark Night of the Scarecrow on episode 218. And we are joined by extra special friend of the show, Amanda Reyes, who, if you've listened to the podcast before or have any interest in TV horror and TV movies from the 70s and 80s, then you'll know that name very well. Amanda is the editor of Are You in the House Alone? And Amanda, I have with me, can you hear it? You probably can't hear it, actually, because I didn't make much noise when I rustled through your book.
I've been dying for you to rustle through something of mine.
So, yes, Amanda is the editor of Are You in House Alone? Growing Up with Gargoyles, Giant Turtles, Valerie Harper, The Cold War, Stephen King and Co-ed Cool Girls, TV movie compendium from 1964 and 1999. And Amanda very kindly signed a copy for me, and I have it right in front of me. So you haven't got that book, then rush out now and pick it up. But Amanda, welcome back to the show. Thank you for joining us again for a TV terror.
Yeah, I'm so excited to be here. I love this movie. So thank you guys.
Well, absolute pleasure. It's always, I mean, it's amazing to have you with us because of your insight to these movies and also because you're one of the gang. So always good to have you aboard, Amanda. And so also, obviously, not forgetting the usual rabble. Erik, how are you doing?
Hey, I'm okay.
You're all right.
Topless.
Oh, again.
The way nature intended.
Well, that would mean you'd be bottomless as well, wouldn't it?
Yeah, but then, that would be just too much, Justin. That'd be too much sexiness for one episode.
Yes. So, Nathan, is it hot where you are? You got anything on underneath?
Yeah, I have something on underneath, unlike the models and nothing underneath.
Yes, which is our previous pick. So, and how are you doing, Nathan?
Okay, I'm just extremely sleepy.
Well, I know it's early in the morning there for you guys. So,
yes.
And Joseph, how are you doing?
I'm doing rabble.
Rabble. Good. Well, we are, of course, going on to the TV terror that is 1981's Dark Night of the Scarecrow as our main feature, coming up a little bit later on the show. But before we do that, we'll have a quick chat about what we've been watching recently. So Amanda, as our very extra special guest, is there anything you've watched you'd like to tell us about?
Sure. So I've only gotten 3 or 4 hours sleep tonight because I got up extra early because I was panicked that my notes weren't good enough for the podcast. So I thought I'd get up anyway. And so I've been up since like 3:30. So this should be fun. But I got in really late last night because the drive-in, which is about 45 minutes away from my house, has been playing some retrospectives. So they've been showing some older films. Last week they showed Jaws, and last night they showed the original Nightmare on Elm Street. So I went to both of those, and I had seen both on the big screen before, and I've seen both movies so many times I couldn't even tell you how many times. But to see them in the drive-in is always like really fun and kind of a new way to watch movies. And they're both really good. I don't know that I can say anything that you guys haven't already heard about either film. I mean, they're both so iconic and famous. But seeing Nightmare on Elm Street last night was, the more I watch it, the more I realize, I guess I've always known that Wes Craven was a really amazing director, but it's interesting when you write a paper like on Wes Craven, it's almost kind of unfair because he's already putting so much subtext into the films, unlike, the people who made Prom Night. Like Prom Night has a lot of subtext, but it's unintentional. But with something like a Wes Craven movie, it's already all there, right? You just are rooting it out for yourself. And one of the things I love so much about Nightmare on Elm Street in particular is the commentary it makes on suburbia. And I won't go long into it. I'm just kind of talking about it because this might be interesting to people, because I read this paper about Nightmare on Elm Street once that I thought was really fascinating, because it talks about how Nancy has to destroy the home or the domestic space to save herself. And it comes at this time of transition where women were moving outside of the home. And so ever since I've read that paper, it's almost impossible for me to watch A Nightmare on Elm Street in any other way except as this commentary about sort of the demise of suburbia. And it's just so good. It's so good. And before the movie started, we actually started watching Nightmare on Elm Street 2 on our little iPad. And that's got its own subtext. So, but anyway, so I've basically been watching a lot of mainstream horror, and I've been having a really good time with it because there's a reason why those movies are classics. And that's kind of all I've been able to watch.
Wow. Well, thank you. I mean, it's interesting, isn't it, to see the drive-in making a resurgence because of COVID. And I wonder how long-term that will be.
I'm hoping...
Here in the...
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, even over here, like I'm in the UK for the last 5 months, and over here they're cropping up, around the place as a safe alternative to regular theaters, and they seem to be doing well. They keep getting sold out. So
yeah, it was a sold out screening. Both movies that I've gone to, and they've been sold out all week. And they're showing new movies. There's some Russell Crowe movie, I think it's called Unhinged, that's playing there as well, and that was sold out. And they actually mistook the drive-in screens, and a bunch of people who were going to the Russell Crowe movie parked over at the Nightmare on Elm Street side, and so they had to come over on like the intercom and tell everybody to move back over. And so it's kind of funny because I was like, oh, I don't know how they're going to feel when that comes up. And people brought their children to both screenings, which was great. And people at the Jaws screening wore Jaws t-shirts, and it was really fun. And I think you're right. It's one of the few things that we have right now that actually feels semi-normal, because you don't have to wear a mask in the car and you feel safe because there's you can only park, there's a space between each car, and they run everything really well at the drive-in we go to. So yeah, it's a really pleasant experience, and it's kind of nice to feel a little normal for once. That's very true.
Excellent. Well, thank you. I say Nightmare on Elm Street, as I've mentioned many times before, was my first horror movie at the theatres way back when. So always hold a special place in my heart. So yeah, but interesting. I'm sure we'll be talking about the subtext of a certain movie coming up.
Well, I got to tell you, I'm really sick and tired of all these cars at the drive-ins not wearing their masks.
You mean like the car bras? They go braless and everything.
Yeah, that's what I was talking about. Those big black ones. I like the big black ones.
And their headlights are very prominent. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Amanda. Joseph, how about you? I know you've watched at least one thing since we spoke last.
Yeah, the only movie I've seen this week was Open 24 Hours, the newish slasher set at a gas station. And this one caught my eye with a pretty wicked trailer, and certainly for the first 25 minutes of the movie, it felt so much like a 90s slasher film that if it weren't for a modern cell phone or two, I would have totally pegged this as such. To start, the film is shot exceptionally well. It's got a likable cast, and the gore effects are really quite impressive. Unfortunately, at 102 minutes, that's where the film ends and the tedium begins. God, this movie seriously needed a shot in the arm, a jolt, or something. I mean, it's such a shame when a movie has so much going for it but doesn't know how to blend the elements successfully. Every single tired, predictable path this film should avoid, it kind of walks with this curious limp in its step. I mean, I was so bored, or maybe not so much bored as I was disappointed that a movie filled with everything I ask for in a slasher film, likable characters, this confined setting that I like, stalking, slashing, and even that, rainy atmosphere that I love. It decides to ignore, traipsing anywhere fun like that. Instead, crawling, and I do mean crawling, to its wet noodle conclusion. I think we discussed this off air before watching the film, and Erik had shown little to no interest in watching, and I wish I would have followed suit, Erik. It's not a bad movie in the least, but guys, it commits cardinal sin numero uno, and we all know what that is.
Boring.
That's right, and that's my opinion on Open 24 Hours.
Okay, I think you, unless Nathan's had a chance to see it, I haven't seen it. I know Erik hasn't yet.
No, I haven't had a chance to watch it.
You're not missing anything.
Did you think the gas station story from Body Bags was better?
1,000,000 times.
Okay, because I love that one.
Yes, it's quite good.
Okay, and Amanda, I'm kind of guessing you've not caught up with that one yet.
No, I'm really behind on everything new. I'm talk about COVID. All I want to do is just go back to a better time, and that happened to be 1984 last night. So
perfect, excellent. Okay, well, thank you, Joseph. Thank you, Joseph. Nathan, have you seen anything you want to tell us about?
Yes, I saw one called Carousel, which is about a carousel horse that gets sick and tired of being mistreated, so it comes to life and starts killing people in this small town.
Sounds like a Nathan pick.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah. Yes. It turns out he's kind of a unicorn instead of a carousel horse because he stabs people with the horn that's on his head. I enjoyed it, but I will say that it's one of those movies that when the humor hits, it made me laugh out loud. But then there's also some very unfunny humorous bits as well. So, it's kind of a mixed bag, but I mean, you get what you expect with a movie like this. So I liked it, just like I loved Thanksgiving.
Okay. Well, it definitely.
I know none of you have seen this, have you?
No, I have heard of it. I did see someone mention it on Facebook, on a Facebook group, and they said there was a quite disturbing killing in it, but I'm not sure what that was. But that is one. I'm not sure which one the disturbing killing was, because there's a lot of killings in this movie. Well, it sounds very realistic, and it's one of those it's filed under "it could happen to you" kind of films.
Yes, very realistic.
Yeah, so
very.
So, anything else, Nathan? Because I presume none of us have seen Carousel.
No.
Okay. But no, that's the only one.
Okay. Well, thank you. Well, lastly, but not leastly, Erik.
No,
nothing.
Well, I mean, sorry, I should mention that.
You should say Bupkis, Erik.
Bupkis, yes. I did appear on the Retro Movie Love podcast, the Patreon special with Meep on Thursday. I'm not sure when it's published, but should be out any day soon. We discussed all 7 Police Academy films. Which
that's horrifying.
That is horrifying.
Yes.
God, did that take like 5 minutes?
It took 2 hours, and let's just say, I won't spoil what we said about the films, but we were unanimous in saying that Police Academy Mission to Moscow, aka Police Academy 7, is the worst film ever made. I have watched Feladay, I have watched Axum, and Police Academy 7 is worse than both of those. It is horrendous.
It's it's pretty bad. It's pretty bad when you can't get Steve Guttenberg to come back to see you. Substitute him with Matt McCoy, but then when Matt McCoy won't even come back, you have to get Charlie Schlatter. You're in trouble.
Yes.
No, I like Charlie Schlatter, but come on.
Oh, he's all Police Academy 7 has Ron Perlman and Christopher Lee. What were they thinking?
Okay, I'm making a note because I want to watch this one. I don't know if I've seen part 7.
Nathan, it's awful. It's aimed at 3-year-olds, and like anyone above that age group is not going to find anything even remotely funny.
Well, I thought you would have laughed at that then, Erik.
No, it has to be. If it's aimed at 4-year-olds, I laughed at it, but not 3-year-olds. I draw the line there. It killed off the franchise, I suppose, film wise, but they did have a live action TV series a few years later that lasted, I think, 1 season.
Okay, well, thank you for going there, so we don't have to.
Yes,
but,
well, I'm going to.
Well, of course you are. So, and of course we are, and we can't mention by name apart from one. I think we've also been watching a lot of films for commentaries, haven't we, at the moment?
Yes, I think Grave Robbers is the only one we can mention, isn't it?
Yeah, there is another one out there that's been listed in some online retailers that, but we're not sure. It hasn't seemed to be given an official announcement yet. So keep checking the Facebook pages. But we've recorded. How many? Well, we've recorded 3, haven't we, so far? And we've got another 4 or 5 lined up. So, so watch out for those. For me, the only thing I saw this week was a new film called The Wretched, which, to be honest, I didn't have massively high hopes for because, sometimes if you're on Amazon Prime or those places and you see a cool-looking poster, we've all been there, you've had a couple of drinks, cool-looking poster, and you think, I'll start watching it. And I started watching something. God, what was it? It was some awful... Oh, it was something like the Clown Seance Massacre or something, or the Clown Hotel Seance Massacre. Something like... It wasn't that, but it was along those lines. But I started watching it, and it looked like it'd been filmed on an iPhone where everyone had been tangoed, so everyone was bright orange, and it just looked awful. And I looked up the reviews on IMDb, and it had like 5.5, and then looked at all the reviews, and all the ones I could see were 1 out of 10. So they kind of say the classic thing that all the cast and crew goes on and gives it 10 out of 10. Even though I had Ari Lehman from the original Jason in Friday the 13th.
Okay, well, I'm sorry, Justin. I like Ari Lehman, but anytime him or say one of those like Debbie Rochon's in a movie, it's an indicator of its quality to me.
Well, I kind of watched the first 5 minutes, and it was I just thought I'm not sure I could watch this. I did look, and normally I'm not one for necessarily believing in reviews because, one man's trash is another man's treasure, or one woman's trash is another woman's treasure. But I just kind of got the bad vibes from it. I just thought it was going to be low budget in all the wrong ways. So I watched a film called The Wretched instead, which was, again, I looked at it, and it had the images of this kind of shadowy woman with this kind of not skull, like a deer skull mask with horns, and I thought, well, it's going to be like a kind of witch type movie, and it was, but it was actually a really pleasant surprise. It was, it reminded me very much of Fright Night, the original Fright Night. It had a very 80s vibe. It had a prologue set in the 80s, but the majority of the film was set in modern day. But what they done, and this is, we always talk about 80s throwbacks and films where they don't do it right because they just people the film with annoying characters and people who are unlikable. Whereas this was all the characters, pretty much without exception, were, if not likable, they're all fun and entertaining, and the main set of characters were very likable and were having fun with it. Had very decent production values, and it was the bottom line. Basically, it was about this teenage boy who goes to stay with his father. And the kind of this witch comes back and possesses the neighbor, and he's trying to convince people that the neighbor is a witch. So very much like Fright Night in that way. And I think it's directed by the Pierce brothers, so it had that like kind of Duffer Brothers kind of Stranger Things kind of vibe to it, but in a way that it was it was a lot of fun. So if you kind of in the mood for a not too taxing kind of 80s throwback. Good production values, then you could do worse than The Wretched. So, but that's the only thing I've seen this week. Any of you guys seen that or heard of it?
No.
It's from I think it's from 2019, so it's kind of relatively new. So, well, without further ado, I kind of guess we should move on to the main feature. So, Joseph, have you got a TV spot for us?
This is the TV intro bumper to Dark Night of the Scarecrow, released back in 1981.
Tonight on the CBS Saturday Night Movies, this gentleman saved this little girl's life, but they accused him of harming her.
We'll do this ourselves.
And he was tragically murdered. Now, one by one, the men of this town are dying. Who is his avenger? Is it the dead man's grief-stricken mother?
They killed my boy!
The little girl who loved him?
I know what you did to Baba.
Or could it be the Scarecrow? Dark Night of the Scarecrow, coming up next.
There is other justice besides the law. Charles Durning stars as a self-serving vigilante who pays dearly for his crimes in this thriller about bigotry, hatred, and vengeance. Set in a small farming town, the story begins with young Mary Lee Williams, Tanya Crow, and her touching innocent friendship with Bubba, Larry Drake, a good-natured, severely retarded man. Brooding, mean-spirited Otis Hazelrig, Charles Durning, resents their relationship. When Mary Lee's body is found bloodied and battered, Otis and 3 cronies assume Bubba has killed her. They find him hiding in a scarecrow and savagely gun him down. But Mary Lee is alive and Bubba was innocent. The vicious murderers, all upstanding citizens, go free. Then a mysterious phantom scarecrow begins stalking them, dealing out harsh, grisly justice in retribution for Bubba's execution. Dark Night of the Scarecrow is a frightening tale of innocence viewed as perversion and evil cloaked as righteousness. So that was from the back of the Key Video VHS. I'm the VHS guy, so of course I'm going to read from that. So what I specifically noticed this time around was the name Hazelrig. Hazelrig, Hazelrig, Hazelrig. Just to channel Gene Siskel, I must have heard the name Hazelrig 1,000 times. If you were to have a drinking game, fuck it, you're toast. And I love the scene where Hazelrig, there's that name again, is sitting around eating breakfast the next morning after Hollis Hawker was, I love these names too, by the way, was killed in the wood chipper or whatever that was. And they're discussing sirens and the district attorney fleeing the town and whatnot. And just as Hazelrig is stuffing his face with pancakes, the one dude just ends the conversation so bluntly with, Hawker ground himself up in his equipment last night. And I'm like, what a way to bring that up. Your timing is shit, dude. But on a serious note, Dark Night of the Scarecrow is a masterpiece. I first saw this back in, it must have been 1983 or 1984. And actually that promo you heard just before I came back in is an exclusive in so much that it came from a recording in 1981 on an old Betamax tape, which was my mother's doing. So that's kind of cool. The movie's on there as well, or most of it, I think. But what I truly love about this film is probably Larry Drake's small but unforgettable role as Bubba. I mean, he's just so good and such a tragic character. You simply can't wait for him to come back from beyond whatever realm and wreak vengeance on these men who's killed him. And what you have here is a film that doles out justice to a sliding scale of despicable characters, Hazelrig being the obvious final kill. I like the fact that the Norris character, perhaps the one with a shred of guilt and who offers to turn himself in, he's spared Bubba's righteousness by the fact that Hazelrig simply beats him to the punch and kills him instead. So, of course, perhaps now Hazelrig carries Norris's sins as a surrogate, which would suggest his death being as horrific and as it is to mean that he maybe suffers the wrath of 2. I don't know. I found that kind of interesting. Dark Night of the Scarecrow is it's an all-around winner for me. I mean, you have heart beneath the horrific. Characters you love, characters you hate, but you're supposed to hate. Well-written dialogue. And this is interesting progression of the crime, the shooting of Bubba, kind of manifesting itself not only as this killer scarecrow in these Final Destination style accidents, but as this sort of there's this sort of sorrow that lingers over the film, but it's lifted when when justice is served and little Mary Lee and Bubba reunite at the end there. And of course the movie is just so terrifying. I mean, you of course got the Scarecrow, which is well shot and just such a memorable presence. But you have this look into what mob justice can and will reap if it's unleashed. So it's a very powerful film and easily in my top 10 of all time, I would say. But for now, Amanda, I'll let you have your say.
Okay, I guess, indulge me a little. This is one of my all-time favorite TV movies and probably films of all time. When we originally started my podcast, the Made for TV Mayhem show, we recapped Nate and, Dan and myself, our top 3 favorite TV movies. And I think I put this one at number 2. And I remember saying the only reason why it's not number 1 is because I have a real personal connection with This House Possessed, which is like my all-time favorite TV movie. But this movie, I'm sort of at odds with what I'm about to say. And I remember saying this when we covered it on our show, is that it has a very theatrical quality to it. And I always feel like when I say that, I'm diminishing TV movies because, they don't always look as good. And I feel really bad about that because they're so great and I want to cheerlead them all the time. But there is definitely a cinematic flair to this film that you don't always see in the made for TV genre. And that's partially because this was originally meant to be a theatrical and they didn't alter a lot of it to make the film when it, I guess got picked up by CBS or whoever was going to bankroll it. So, So it has a quality, and on the commentary, and I don't know if anybody listened to the commentary on here, but one of the things Frank D. Felitta, the director, said was, he said, "I don't make television, I make movies." And again, I'm sort of at odds with that quote, but he's right. He has a certain flair about it. But also, one of the things that really stands out to me about Dark Knight of the Scarecrow is that thematically, it's got all of these different things happening in it. I mean, it's doing a lot of different things, and I guess this is a good place for me to sort of introduce Frank D. Felitta's filmography as an important jumping off point to see how we got to Dark Knight of the Scarecrow. So he's always been interested with themes of duality, and actually the back of that box, and I don't remember exactly what Joe said, but it's talking in binaries at the end. It's like good and evil, right? And everything in this film is about something versus something else. And so D. Felitta has always kind of dealt with that. So, and with The Other. So let me start with The Other. Let's go as far back as I can. So in 1963, Frank D. Felitta directed a documentary for NBC titled Mississippi: A Self-Portrait. In that documentary, he interviewed an African-American named Booker Wright, who was a waiter at an all-white restaurant. After that special aired, Wright got a lot of harassment, and then he was murdered. And so I think D. Felitta has always been sort of haunted by that act. And I think a lot of his films deal with the other and the othering. And I think we see that maybe at its sort of ultimate metaphor in this movie, because the three main characters that we are rooting for in the film are all othered. And what I mean by that is we've got a mentally retarded man, right? Bubba. We've got a little girl and an older woman, two characters, and a gender, first of all, a gender that's already marginalized. And then we have a young girl and an older woman, both of which are never taken seriously, right, in society, right? So he's already dealing with the other, like in so many different ways in this film. But he also likes to look at the duality of things. So doubling is a big thing for him too. So in a lot of his other work, so like he did Audrey Rose, right? So, we've got, I don't know how well anybody here remembers Audrey Rose, but it's about a little girl possessed, right, by another dead girl. And so then we've got this sort of duality within the child. And then we have The Two Worlds of Jenny Logan, which is a TV movie he made with Lindsay Wagner, which is about a woman who goes kind of time travels, and she's having two different sort of romantic relationships in the story. And then he also did Scissors, right, with Sharon Stone, which is about quote unquote twins, both played by Sharon Stone. And so, so we've got the othering and duality really heavily at play here, and I hope this is all making sense. And so some of the things I noticed about Dark Knight of the Scarecrow that really stands out to me in terms of duality is we have nature versus industry, right? So if you'll notice in the film, and this is one of the things that I think really stands out to me, because with each viewing I notice something different about it, but when Bubba is killed in the field, the birds stop. I don't know if you caught that, but there's all these birds making noises, crows, I think. And then there's this complete stop of noise. And then there's a wind, right? And whenever something happens to one of the characters, there's always this kind of wind, the supernatural element. And it sort of ties into Bubba being sort of tied in with nature, which we see at the beginning when they're making the little leis together with the flowers. And whenever one of the henchmen get killed, we are looking at them being killed by implements of industry, right? So the one guy's killed by a thresher. There's like the tractor, right, that he's being chased by. And then the one guy gets caught in the silo and he gets drowned in it. And so this movie is actually commenting on, I don't know, I just say nature versus industry. I don't know how else to word that. So it's got that. I love that the marginalized characters, aside from Bubba, are the only characters in the movie, aside from Sam, the district attorney too, who are willing to stand up to these men. I'm not really sure how Hazelrig got to the point of authority that he's at, but he sort of wields this sort of, as the postman in this strange way, this sort of authoritarian figure, and nobody is willing to stand up to him, except these characters that are othered. So I love that. There's something empowering in that. And when I give lectures on TV movies, I actually talk about that theme in particular in Dark Knight of the Scarecrow. And so that's just a lot of hoopy joopy to say that, like, this movie is doing so many different things. And I think it endures for several different reasons. One, it got a home video release on VHS, on DVD, and now on Blu-ray. So that helps it stay sort of in our consciousness. But also, I think it transcends its roots, not just by being approached by DeFelitta as him wanting to make it more theatrical in its aesthetics, but also that Feigelson, the J.D. Feigelson, who is the screenwriter of this, implemented a lot of really interesting themes that I think DeFelitta was already attached to when he came onto the film. So when Joe said that there's a lot of heart in the film, I think he really picked up on this, how do I want to word it? I think he picked up on that the filmmakers really cared about these things that they were talking about in the subtext. And I think that comes through with the film. And also I think it's important to note, like Joe said, that even though Bubba is only in the movie for like 10, 15 minutes, it's like his ghost follows the film throughout. And so we never forget him. And we see the movie almost through the eyes of innocence, even though we're also watching the point of view of the film is through a pedophile. I mean, the movie is brave enough to sit with the bad guy and kind of tell the story from his point of view, yet at the same time. So again, it's like this binary. It's like innocence versus corruption is right there, right? And so somehow DeFelitta and Feigelson have managed to sort of merge the two together and keep both points of views prevalent and yet tell a cohesive story. And so I don't know if any of that made sense. You know, it's very early here, but this movie is like, it's just got so much going for it that I can't help but be drawn to it every time I watch it. It's almost impossible not to just fall into the story because there's just something new to discover every time you watch it. And aside from that, just from an entertainment point of view, it is off the cuff amazing in terms of acting. They have so many great actors in this. It's just so well made. It's scary. It's everything you want a horror movie to be. It's a really fascinating supernatural slasher. It's atmospheric. It's moody. The soundtrack is perfect. It's just a wonderful movie. And I hope all of that made sense. And that's what I have to say. Thank you.
Yeah, I was going to mention something about Charles Durning, the mailman character. Now I was thinking, this guy seems to have an awful lot of authority over this town for a mail carrier. It's like, you tell anyone I killed that mentally handicapped man, I'll kill you. Now here's your credit card bill.
Yeah.
It's like, okay. He's like, what are you? You're not the law. Piss off.
He's like sorting mail, and he's like, we got to get rid of, Sam. He's like causing us a lot of problems, and he's like sorting mail, and it's funny, but for some reason, I guess because, the town is really dilapidated, right? And that's really important to note too, because it's built on nostalgia. It's almost like it's Lynchian in that way. David Lynchian, in that David Lynch loves to show these idyllic small towns that have been burned by corruption that lays just underneath the surface. So, like at the beginning of Blue Velvet, there's that great scene with the firemen going by and they're waving at the camera. And then it goes and it sort of burrows into the grass. And in the grass, there's all these bugs fighting each other. And that's kind of what Dark Knight of the Scarecrow is doing for like 90 minutes, right? And so it's kind of fascinating.
I like the fact that we never see Charles Durning in anything else other than his mail carrier uniform.
That's right.
It's very odd. Erik, what did you think of Dark Knight of the Scarecrow?
Oh, I like it a lot. And Amanda was saying there, it often is said that it doesn't feel like made for TV, and again I would agree. Not to demean made for TV movies, but my experience of watching them is VHS rips on YouTube, so they tend to look not as good as the stuff I'm watching on Blu-ray and DVD, but the version I was watching this week was pin sharp and looked so crisp compared to the TV movies I've watched in the past. And also the one thing I noticed was a complete absence of those little cliffhanger moments where the film fades to black to indicate, where the ad breaks go. But I don't know if they were removed for home video versions. Were they, Amanda, or they just weren't there?
That's an interesting question. There is a couple moments where I can tell where it fades to black, but I don't really know. I didn't see this when it originally aired, so I wouldn't. Yeah, I don't know where all the commercial breaks would be. You're right; it does flow a little differently.
It does, yeah. So what I like about the film a lot is kind of the for the most part the ambiguity regarding its supernatural aspects. You could very easily view the film as being quite rational. Things could be explained rationally for the most part, apart from the odd shot here and there in the film. It could be Mrs. or Bubba's mother could be doing the killings, and she's just never shown on screen, or it could be the district attorney. It's not like we see the Scarecrow prowling the streets with a pitchfork. So we don't see who's instigating the events that lead to these men's deaths, apart from, and I believe it's an insert shot that was added 20 years after the fact, the shot of the gears on the tractor at the end moving by themselves. So it could, that sort of ambiguity is kind of good, but the downside of that, I suppose, is that the Scarecrow is so sparingly used, and it's such an eerie image. That sackcloth visage he has with the big eye holes and that is so spooky, but it's not seen on screen all that much. I think they could have possibly made more use out of that. That's my one tiny criticism of the film, but it's a very tiny criticism. I do love that the film builds up the redneck characters, this totally Make America Great Again mob, to be so loathsome that it's becomes then so satisfying when they get their comeuppance at the end. I mean, Charles Durning is particularly brilliant as this ghastly character, and you're so heavily weighted in favor of the good guys that the film sort of delivers this sort of catharsis at the end, kind of like what happens in Carrie, I thought. And I think I said this to you before, Amanda, when I was guesting on your show a few months ago. We were talking about Shannon Doherty movies, and when it comes to made-for-TV movies, I tend to prefer the sort of the more, quote, after-school special type of films like Cocaine, One Man's Obsession, or Sarah T, Portrait of an Alcoholic. For me, when it comes to horror and made-for-TV, sometimes they can be maybe a bit too lightweight, but in this instance, I think, whilst it's not terribly gruesome, there's definitely an edge to it that you don't get in a lot of other made-for-TV horror movies. And I'm wondering if that scene at the end where we see the blood dripping off the pitchfork after, spoiler alert, Charles Durning has met his end. I'm wondering if that was included in the original broadcast, because it seemed quite, not extreme, but it seemed like more extreme than you would normally see in films made for TV of this era. I don't know, was that in the original broadcast? Do you know, Amanda?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't remember them noting anything about that. It's interesting what you said too about the gears, because I think on the commentary they talked about that there was an argument about whether or not to show it, but I don't remember them specifically saying it was added much later.
I read that off IMDb, so it could very well be not true.
I don't know, but there was some talk about how much to keep it in the supernatural and how much not. So they may have added stuff at the end, but I kind of feel like it was originally envisioned as a theatrical film, but I kind of feel like when they went into it, they knew it was going to be a TV movie. So I don't know if they would have added things, because I don't know that home video was a thing then, like they, so I kind of feel like maybe it was incorporated into the film originally.
It just struck me because after watching things like Cruise into Terror and some of the like Chiller and those type of movies, which are completely like gore free, it was just surprising to see sort of this bloody pitchfork in this film. It kind of stood out. One scene I loved was when the character falls into the wood chipper. I can't remember the character's name, but then it cuts really quickly to a shot of Charles Durning slapping some strawberry jam onto his plate.
Yeah.
Which I thought was very clever. So the acting in the film is terrific. You've already mentioned Larry Drake, who isn't in the film that much, but he does shine. Tanya Crowe is great as Mary Lee. Charles Durning, to me, though, is the complete standout. He's this film's Melissa from Friday the 13th Part 7, or Glazer from The Burning, or even Buddy Repperton. He's just so smarmy and vile. I suppose.
Just real quick, do you think like when Charles Durning, like on his deathbed, was looking back on his career and he was like, I hope people compare me to Melissa from Friday the 13th Part 7 years from now when they're talking about Dark Knight of the Scarecrow?
They buried him with a big white pearl necklace.
Ooh. There's one scene that's quite unsettling. It's the scene where Otis confronts Mary Lee at the Halloween dance, and she's kind of dressed up like an adult. She's got makeup and lipstick and eyeshadow and that, and he's talking to her. He's trying to pry information out of her to see if she knows anything about the killings going on. But it's so creepy the way he's talking to her. It's like he's trying to entice her back to his house or something. Oh, there's something very unsettling about that scene. But no, overall, I think that like the film is incredibly strong. Yeah, and it's a huge thumbs up from me. So yes, thank you for picking this one, and thank you for your in-depth analysis. I always feel really bad going on after Amanda. She gives such intelligent analysis, and then I say, I like the scene where the strawberry jam was hit onto the plate.
Yeah, I like how Amanda can look at like Charles Durning's shoes and be like, the soul of Charles Durning's shoes represents the soul of hatred.
Yeah.
She's always going to have that ready on hand.
That's good.
Yeah, and all I can do is compare him to Melissa from Friday the 13th Part 7.
No, that's so good. I'm just like, I'm not sure this is making sense, but let's talk about the duality of whatever. But that's kind of my job. So, you know, just real quick, just to talk about that scene between Marilee and Otis. That scene to me is so powerful because it is really eerie. And I remember talking when we discussed this on my show, I love the way he's lit at some points, like sort of like Dracula. I think that when the security guard comes in with the flashlight, the way his eyes are lit up, and there's a lot of focus on his eyes. But also I love that she's not afraid of him. You know, this little girl going up against a guy that we're positive she's getting a vibe that there's something, aside from the fact that he's a murderer, there's also something going on there with his desire for her. And she's not terrified of him. She goes right up to him and she says, I know what you did. And I love it. Like, to me, that's the best scene in the film. It's the most tense and terrifying. And I love the character of Marilee. Normally I don't love child characters, but she's really well done. And Tanya Crow's really great in the part.
Yeah, I was going to mention the Tanya Crow's character, because for me, she has the scariest moment in the film where she simply says, Bubba's not gone. He's just hiding. I thought that was so creepy. But Nathan, what are your thoughts on Dark Knight of the Scarecrow?
I'm always been a huge fan of Dark Knight of the Scarecrow. You know, just like you guys have said, Charles Durning is fantastic in this movie because, you know, a lot of times in movies like this, it's as good as its villain is. And I'm like, he is definitely a very like scumbag villain that you really want to see get his comeuppance. Thankfully he does. But yeah, I always felt awful for Bubba's mother because like he just assumes that she's the one that's been doing this stuff. So he like basically terrorizes this, you know, old woman who just like lost her son that he killed or took, you know, part in. And it's such a cruel thing to do. I mean, Otis is just one of those characters, like when you just think he can't get worse, he does. And, you know, it's funny that you guys mentioned that, you know, he's got all this power in this town and he's just like the postmaster. It reminded me, and this is a real life story. I read this book in broad daylight, and it's basically about this man who
Ken McElroy.
Yeah, he wielded like control over this whole town because people were intimidated by him. And
they sort of based Roadhouse off that incident, the Ken McElroy incident. Roadhouse has a lot of parallels with that story.
Wait, when did this happen? This postal guy?
He's not a postal guy. He was just this town redneck.
Like, he would definitely be somebody that if this situation was real and he was in the Otis position, he probably would have done the exact same thing.
Okay.
Amanda, have you not seen In Broad Daylight? It's got Brian Dennehy, and I think it's a TV movie, isn't it?
No, I don't think I have.
No, it's really good.
Yeah, it's a really good TV movie. But I recommend the book because it's very detailed about everything that happened. And like I said, Otis just reminds me of that kind of character where he just kind of rules through intimidation. Like, I think a lot of people in that town were afraid of him, so they let him get by with, like, you know, some crazy stuff. And you know, in my opinion, because I always felt to myself that Otis didn't care if Bubba was guilty or not. Like, it didn't matter to him.
He was intimidated, or he was just put off by his mental facilities, which was disgusting.
I think he was jealous too, because you know that opening scene when they're making the lays and she's like, now I have to kiss you. And he doesn't, I love that they wrote that in because it's clear that Bubba is uncomfortable with that. You know, he doesn't want the little girl to kiss him. And it's important to note that because, there's all these stereotypes about these sort of, man-child kind of things. And you can see that he's so completely innocent, but then Otis sees the kiss and he's projecting all of his sexual desire onto Bubba right in that moment. And he's jealous of him because the little girl will kiss him and it's disgusting. And so in the first 5 minutes of the film, they've already developed, exactly how dark Otis's heart is, just right away. It's already written, for the audience, and it's so well done.
And, Otis is just one of those villains. There is literally nothing redeeming about him. He's just a horrible, horrible person. And this is to Charles Durning's credit, because I've seen Charles Durning in, other Stripes plays. I've seen him in other movies where he's playing the good guy, and he's excellent there as well.
I didn't know he was in a sequel to Stripes called Stripes Please.
Stripes is driving me crazy. Every time I'm on here talking, I think she thinks I'm talking to her.
Oh, I love it.
But anyway, Dark Knight of the Scarecrow, I love the movie. I think it's great. And yeah, it's an excellent pick. And I absolutely love the final shot of the movie. I think it's so haunting.
Yes, definitely. Justin, your thoughts on Dark Knight of the Scarecrow, please.
Yeah, well, I'm not going to go against the flow and say that it's not a good movie, because it is a very good movie, and I'm sure it's one I did see on TV way back. And I used to have, no, actually still got, when I got rid of most of my VHS collection, I kept Dark Knight of the Scarecrow, because the UK pre-cert release had this fantastic cover of the Scarecrow on the pole in the field with the eyes looking out. So it's a couple of things I want to sort of mention that we haven't really touched on yet, and I just thought you'll get your views on it. There were three things. The first thing was that that kind of adds. It's the first time I watched it. I thought this at the end of the movie is that Bubba. Because the spirit or whatever it is the two things that jumped out at me when I saw it this time that I hadn't noticed before was that the film doesn't say explicitly, but it hints at the fact that Bubba's mother, played by Jocelyn Brando, was brought back this spirit, this demon, to get vengeance. Because I don't know if you noticed, there's she says there's other justices in this world, but also when the little girl comes round to the house looking for Bubba, she noticed the flowers, and underneath the flowers is a book, an old-looking book, which I kind of took to like a book of spells. So I kind of got the feeling this time that it was hinting that she'd brought back this kind of demon something to get vengeance for her son.
Ooh, like Pumpkinhead.
Like Pumpkinhead. Because the interesting thing was when they dig up Bubba's grave and he's in there, they know that he's not physically flesh and blood come back to get them. So something has come back to get them, but it's not Bubba. So that adds a different kind of end to the movie where you've got this killer Scarecrow and the little girl. Is she actually in a place of safety at the end of the movie, or is the sting in the tail that this thing is pretending to be Bubba but isn't actually Bubba? It's something more dark. Obviously, I didn't explore that, and that's just me putting thoughts onto that. But did you? Because many kind of TV movies, or talking to Initiation of Sarah, or many of the kind of movies when they touch on witchcraft, the Midnight Offerings, and they're much more explicit in that kind of witchcraft thing, aren't they? Whereas this seems to be doing it much more subtly. So, didn't any of you guys get that vibe from it or notice?
Yeah, I was going to say, whatever entity this is, it could be Bubba, it could be something else. But my issue would be that when they dig up Bubba and they see that the body is still in there, it would just indicate to me that it would just be his essence, or just his spirit, as it were. I don't know, but I like your interpretation. I especially like the book thing, because I didn't notice that.
Yeah.
If the demon was going to kill Mary Lee, though, why did it give her a flower? Answer that one.
Well, because maybe it's lulling her into, because evil doesn't necessarily, it does things in different ways.
It's like here's a flower. I'm going to put a lot of those on your grave, and that's how.
But So, like, one of the things I always think about when I watch this is what is Bubba's? Okay, so for me, I think that it's already written in stone when he's murdered because of the wind and the way the birds stop singing. And it's like he's such a part of nature that nature is now going to help him get vengeance. But I also have to wonder, what is Bubba's concept of death and murder, right? And as such an innocent, is it really within him to do that? But it kind of feels like Mara Lee is sort of like the Wizard of Oz, because she tells him at the end when he hands her the rose, now I'm going to teach you the chasing game. So there's, right. So he plays the hiding game at the beginning, which is really interesting because it's everything in this movie is about what's hidden. Right. So he plays the hiding game, and then apparently there's another game between the hiding game and the chasing game. And I don't know what the name of that is because Mara Lee doesn't specifically say it, but as the credits start to roll, she says, I'm going to teach you this new game. And so I feel like Bubba is a supernatural spirit that was manifested at the beginning of his death, but that Mara Lee is the person that's concocted the revenge on his behalf because she has a deeper knowledge of vengeance than he would. I mean, that's just my interpretation of it. I just feel like he's so completely innocent that if it were Bubba coming back in any form, he wouldn't be able to do the things that he did without help. But it's interesting because I never noticed the book before, and I kind of feel like I want to go back and now rewatch it again and kind of see if there's more hints to Mrs. Ritter having more to do with the spirit that is wreaking the havoc than I originally would have given her credit for.
It's only because you remember in the courthouse she says there's more justice in this world than legal, or whatever it was, paraphrasing. And I kind of and it's not explicit because when the little girl goes in on the table and she sees the ring of flowers and she thinks of Bubba and she's going looking for Bubba, it's on top of a really old book with gold leaf and sort of like leather-bound book that looks, and it doesn't say Book of Spells or anything. It seemed to me like a bit of intentional why the flowers are on top of that book. It just seems as if it's almost someone had done some kind of spell to using those flowers and using the idea of witchcraft and using something that's familiar to people or a token of somebody's and so it is not explicit, which I liked about it because it leaves it up to interpretation. But that it just gave me a little bit of a start at the ending, thinking, well, is this whatever entity? Because when people summon demons, and of course we've watched enough horror movies to know when people summon demons, they think they can control them, but that's not always the case. But whether or not that's an intention or it's just something I read into it, I don't know. But I just thought it gave an interesting alternative reading to the end of the movie, is that maybe it gave the film a final chill rather than like a happy ending, as it were.
One thing I was going to mention, not to keep interrupting you, Justin, but going off of what Amanda said about how Bubba is kind of maybe manifested as nature come back to help rid these people of what they've done to him. It kind of reminds me, she asked, would Bubba be capable of murder when he comes back? So it kind of reminds me of, I'm sure you've either seen or you're familiar with the TV show Lost from a few years back, right?
Yeah.
Well, in that show, one character basically is, he's good and he's curious. He's not mentally challenged, but he's essentially, just good. And he's resurrected as this kind of evil incarnate. So I'm wondering if the specifics surrounding Bubba's death sort of fused with the nature to kind of give him this darkness, as it were. It kind of reminded me of that anyway. I saw some parallels there. Like death fused with nature would create this evil, well, not evil, because what he's doing to these people is just, but kind of creates this darker force of nature, I'd say.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that in so much the film, the one film it reminded me of, or one segment, was the Peter Cushing segment from Tales from the Crypt, where he's wronged. He's an old man living in a house, and I think there's some developers and they're trying to force him out.
Yes, that's so good. He's the toy maker. The
toy maker, yeah. So he comes back and he's got that childish thing, because that's right, he's a toy maker, isn't he? So he has this kind of childish nature to him. As in a fun, childlike nature rather than childish. And he comes back and exacts revenge. And I did wonder if that was perhaps an influence certainly the kind of EC Comics thing, like you saw in Creepshow the following year with the cake episode, whatever that one's called, with the
Father's Day.
Father's Day, that's right. So that it very much felt like that. The other thing I just wanted to talk about very briefly was the parallels with the slasher movie, because this is 1981, of course, the height of the slasher movie boom. And it's funny actually watching it this time, actually how little it reminded me of a slasher movie in how I remember it in some ways. I mean, it has a setup that is, you've got like a series of murders, and of course you've got the most unlikely outside of something like Rituals or Deliverance, where you have middle-aged men being bumped off one by one, which goes completely against the grain of 1981, which was horny campers being bumped off by people with shears. So you had that, and you don't actually. I mean, the murders themselves are not kind of slasherific, apart from the end, and even the end with the death by pitchfork is in inverted commas is something that was set up, but it was an accident, wasn't it? It wasn't an accident, but it certainly wasn't Bubba stabbing Charles Sterling through the middle with a pitchfork. So that was kind of interesting, because I saw some of the newspaper cuttings I saw, the films that were in release at the time this aired for Halloween 1981 were, your kind of Halloween 2s, your Happy Birthday to Me still in rotation. So these films are still very popular at the box office. So I'm not sure actually how much of the influence of the subgenre at the time and during development was moved forward, because I'm sure when we get into some background, the original idea for this was not this movie. It was something different involving a scarecrow. So that I thought was sort of interesting, look at the context within the thing. The last thing I was going to say was some of the things that kind of jumped out at me as a bit not silly, but like I thought were quite funny. Was that when you got the guy being killed in the wood chipper, and when they turn up at his house, he's been carried out on a stretcher, which I thought was a little bit unlikely.
Yeah. In a bucket.
Well, exactly. In Nightmare on Elm Street, shouldn't have been say, where's the coroner he's throwing up in the bathroom?
What I would ask, though, Justin, is that have you actually seen anyone killed in a wood chipper? Do you know that it would actually ground their body into mulch? Because this is very disturbing if you have.
I haven't, but I kind of got the impression that would be the case.
Well, maybe it would gum up the wood chipper.
The other thing I thought was it kind of possibly I'm reaching for straws really, or clasping at straws to find anything negative. It's not negative, but like things with this movie. It was the idea of the trial, whether or not they would have got off like they did. It felt a little bit cartoonish, this idea that they could have got away with gunning down somebody who was tied to a post.
Yeah, I know.
I don't know.
Got the pitchfork, like it's laying next to him, like he's not even holding it. Like they didn't even put it in his grip, and so they're like it's just lazily leaning on his body, and he's also been elevated, right, because he's in the Scarecrow costume, and you're like, that looks pretty suspicious.
Essentially, what you've got is you got a marginalized person in Bubba, and you got these these bigots, and I would honestly see them getting away with it, at least by today's standards, possibly.
I could certainly see that, but the other thing was that you had this murder trial, which seemed to happen within a day of, because a little girl goes to sleep, doesn't she? And she wakes up the next day, and they've already been acquitted.
I assumed it was an inquisition, like just to see if they could take it to trial. You know what I mean? And so they were just prepping for the thing. And I will say, I always forget that Sam, the district attorney, is like a good guy. And so the actual authoritarian figures in the town, which would be him and the security guard at the school, are actually willing to stand up to Otis as well, which I think is
important. And they're neutered by injustice as much in the way that a lot of the good lawmakers these days are neutered by injustice.
So very true. Very true. There. Yeah, I think Erik pointing out the Make America Great Again, like I didn't even think of it in those terms, but I feel like you could sit and watch this now and relate a lot of it to like the current state of affairs here.
Gosh, yeah, I was going to say that. I didn't want to get too political, but it really reminds me a bit of the BLM movement. I mean, you got Bubba as this peaceful protest come back to wreak vengeance upon the wrongs done to an innocent. I won't name names, but I don't know. I hate to get political, but it's our show, so suck it.
Well, just real quick, Justin, and I'm not directing this at you, but I don't know if you were going to mention this, but can we talk about the scene at the gravesite that looks like Brokeback Mountain to me? Do you know what I'm talking about? When he's cradling Skeeter in his arms.
Go ahead. I don't know what you're talking about.
Well, so what happens is, like, when everybody's almost gone, except for the Robert F. Lyons character, which you called Norris, but I always call him Skeeter, and I don't know what his name actually is, but like the car mechanic, and Otis comes to visit him, and he goes, Mr. Hazelrig, and then he looks around, and he's like, I wasn't expecting you, and it's got this very lilt in his voice that's very romantic to me. And then later on, when he
sounds
sees what's
almost
in the
British, like at times when he says Hazelrig.
Oh, it's just like Mr. Hazelrig. It's very Southern Belle to me.
Or
And then
almost
when
Australian, sort of.
and then when he's at the grave and he's running away. By the way, Skeeter is no better than Bubba in terms of his intelligence, and I think it's interesting that he's part of this pack. And the only reason why he fits in is because he's willing to, acquiesce to whatever Hazelrig wants. And I think that's the only reason why he's even there on that side. But but then when he's running away from the gravesite and Otis chases him, he's like cradling him in his arms and he kisses him on the head. Do you remember that? Otis leans down and kisses him and cradles him like a baby. And it's such a weird sexual thing for me. Like, I kind of feel like there's a relationship between those two guys. Did anybody else pick up on that?
Well, I was going to say maybe they had some fun times in the shed. I don't know. Maybe they had some Brokeback Mountain in their own tent. I don't know.
I took it more that he was really trying to calm him down and just go, look, hush, you're like a child, and say, things are going to get better. You need to calm down because you're going to get us both in trouble.
Could be like that Of Mice and Men scenario.
But there's such a familiarity when he kisses his forehead. Like, who does that? You know what I mean? And so, like, every time I see that, I'm just like, something's going on.
Well, maybe there's a lot of more subtext and stuff running underneath, because it's interesting. We're talking about Hazelrig, the character, because they say he's also this idea that he's this trumped up, literally, character who is, but he's kind of like you say, he's wielding his power in this town. He's living in a boarding house, isn't he? So he doesn't even have his own house. So he's not somebody who's living in this big mansion and he's kind of like the main man in town or something. It's this interesting thing that he's creating his own power, isn't he?
Yeah, somebody living in someone else's house. That sounds familiar too.
So, well, shall we move on to some background? Amanda, what do you have for us?
I'll tell you that this aired on October 24th, 1981 on CBS. It did really well in the ratings. It got a 17.9/31, and I have a real hard time with ratings, but I think that just essentially means that about 31% of households with televisions in them were watching Dark Knight of the Scarecrow on the night it aired, which is almost a third of the country. It came in number 61 for the season out of 268 titles, so that's pretty good. It ran against on ABC Love Boat and Fantasy Island, and I made a note that it was the episode of Love Boat where Telly Savalas comes on and he brings a robot, Isaac, and he tries to replace Isaac with the robot. And so I'm sure that's what I watched on the night this originally aired, because I don't know why I would ever turn down a robot Isaac.
Kojak had an episode with robots?
Yes.
Oh,
yeah, I've seen it. I've watched it not that long ago. It reran here. We have a local channel that plays Love Boat, and we watched it. And it's pretty amazing. And then on NBC was a show called Nashville Palace, which was hosted by Roy Clark, which was like a musical show, and something called Fits and Bones, which was a Smothers Brothers TV movie that I think was a pilot film that never took off, or maybe it did become a series. I don't know anything about Fits and Bones. Dark Knight was the actually highest rated thing for the night. So the fact that it beat Love Boat is pretty extraordinary, because that was like an untouchable show at this point in the 80s. Dark Knight of the Scarecrow had a rerun on network television on September 7th, 1985. Didn't do as good in the ratings that time. As I said, it was originally meant to be theatrical. They did shoot it in 17 days. It was cut down from 18 because I think there was a fire in Peru where they shot it. Peru, by the way, California, where they filmed this, looks exactly the same. I have a friend who went there and she did a location thing where she went to all the different locations, and Mrs. Bunch's house is still there. And like very little of the facade of that town has changed since 1981. Character actor Strother Martin, who was in Cool Hand Luke and Brotherhood of Satan, which is an amazing film, he was supposed to play Hazelrig. He was cast, and apparently he actually helped J.D. Feigelson develop some of the dialogue for Hazelrig, but he died before production. And I think on the commentary, they say that they kept a lot of his what he had written, and Charles Durning now just says it. And so Charles Durning did the delivery that Strother Martin wrote for himself, which is kind of interesting. And just as an aside, Durning played a postman at least twice that I can think of. And speaking of how he can play good guys and bad guys, he played an evil post office worker in Dark Knight of the Scarecrow, but in 1975, he played a really sweet romantic lead postal worker in a musical titled Queen of the Stardust Ballroom, which was an adaptation of a Broadway production. It's a really interesting TV movie. It's lovely. I really like it. I don't know what your threshold is for musicals, but I would recommend it, especially to see Charles Durning play somebody so completely different. I think all of you mentioned the jam scene. So the filmmakers on the commentary mentioned that when they screened this at the Writers Guild, the audience laughed for a whole minute into like the next scene because they just loved the jam slopping down. And that was how they sort of were able to work around the fact that they had to withhold some of the more gratuitous violence because it was going to TV. So they had these funny elements. And I don't know if you guys mentioned Skeeter's hat on the end of the shovel when Hazelrig hits him over the head. Do you remember his hat is stuck to the shovel, which is a really fun.
Oh, yeah.
It's such a fun moment. Feigelson actually hadn't done a lot at this point, and I don't know that he's a really prolific filmmaker, but he has directed and written things. And so one of the things he did that I thought was really interesting was he did a 1980s segment for the Twilight Zone. And I'm only mentioning it because in that episode, there's also a segment directed by Wes Craven. And, you know, Craven and Feigelson also worked together on Chiller, which is a Craven TV. I think it's not the second to last TV movie that Wes Craven made. It's my favorite of the Craven TV movies, but most people seem to prefer his, you know, Invitation to Hell and Summer Fear more. So whatever. But, the henchmen, they had a pretty good, sort of a pedigree in horror. So Claude Earl Jones, who plays Philby, was in She Freak. You might remember him as the guy who runs the restaurant that She Freak, before she was a She Freak, starts out at the beginning of the film. And he actually bookends the movies at the end. He also appeared in Evil Speak. Lane Smith was in Terror at London Bridge, which is a really fabulous TV movie that I'm guessing you guys will cover at some point because it is a slasher as well, from 1985 with David Hasselhoff. And Robert F. Lyons, who plays Skeeter, is this incredible actor, and he did a ton of TV movies. A couple that I really like is The Strange Possession of Mrs. Oliver, where he's sort of very important character in that, although I don't think he has a large part. And he was also in Death Car on the Freeway. I think he was in a movie too called The Todd Killings, which I haven't seen. And of course, Jocelyn Brando, who plays Mrs. Ritter, is Marlon Brando's sister. And she appeared in some horror made for television. Aside from this, she was in an early episode of One Step Beyond, which was sort of a Twilight Zone-like show that aired at the exact same time. And as a matter of fact, it sort of predates Twilight Zone, I think, by just a couple months, but it took a different avenue and it wasn't as allegorical. It was more just about exploring the supernatural. And she's really good she's in like the second or third episode of it. And she also did an episode of Dark Room, which was an anthology show that was fabulous. It only has 6 episodes. She's in the one called Catnip. That's kind of iconic. It's one of the ones that most people remember when they think about Dark Room. And Dark Knight the Scarecrow would turn out to be one of her last projects. Also, in an interview to promote Dark Knight the Scarecrow, Mara Lee, Tanya Crow, actually mentioned that one of her favorite TV shows was Trapper John, and I saw that she actually appeared in an episode of Trapper John right before she did this, so I thought that was really cool. It was one of my favorite shows, too. That's why I made note of it. And so the director of photography, Vincent Martinelli, he actually shot a lot of pilot telefilms. In 1979, he made 3 of them. That's Mandrake, The Ultimate Imposter, and Samurai. All of those are totally incomprehensible. Like I've watched all of them and I couldn't even tell you what the storylines are, but they're all really well made, and they look beautiful. He's obviously a very good DP. And the score actually had a release on CD at some point, which is pretty rare. I think the only other TV movie soundtrack I can think of off the top of my head that's had like a legitimate release of its score would be Duel. And I'm sure there's others, but those are the 2 that come to mind. And Justin was also bringing up older characters in a slasher movie. And so horror on television in terms of TV movies in 1981 was not very good. There were just a few. I looked through the list of all of the movies that aired, I think 268 of them, right? And Fantasies came in at number 6 for the season. That's the one with Suzanne Plachette, which is where she's running a soap opera and somebody's killing the actors from her show. And that's a straight up slasher too, but told with older, mature characters. I mean, Suzanne Pleshette was in her 30s or 40s when she made it, and she's the quote unquote final girl of it. That was a huge film, mostly because they used real soap actors to play the soap actors in the film. And so they were marketing it like Stuart Damon from General Hospital and Robert S. Woods will be in this. And soaps were huge at the point. So everybody tuned in to watch that. But we also had The Babysitter with Stephanie Zimbalist. I don't know if you guys have seen that. William Shatner, Patty Duke. That's a really good TV movie. It was directed by Peter Medic, who did The Changeling. And then we also had Midnight Offerings, which is one of my all-time favorite TV movies with Melissa Sue Anderson. And now I'm forgetting her name, Mary McDonough, right, from the Waltons, who was also in Mortuary, and they play like teen witches fighting for turf, basically, and it's really, really fun. If you guys haven't seen that, we haven't covered it on my show yet, but that might make a good upcoming episode for Halloween. Now that I'm thinking about it, and just as a final note, just a personal piece of personal trivia. I love this movie so much that I have a Dark Knight of the Scarecrow t-shirt. I have a Dark Knight of the Scarecrow drinking glass, which is just a glass where somebody etched in Bubba on it for me. And I have actually a little cardboard standee of the Scarecrow, which I have up in my office. I feel very close to this movie. I love it very much.
Was it like a video store like display or?
No, it was made I went to a convention somewhere when I was living in Pittsburgh, and somebody was selling standees of.
Was it knee-high horror?
I don't.
Is it sort of like a foot long?
Yeah.
Maybe? It's probably knee-high horror because I got a bunch of those from one of those very same conventions around that same area. So I'm wondering if it was them.
Yeah, they had the Dark Knight of the Scarecrow standee, and I was like, "You're joking," and they were like, "No, you're looking at it," and I was like, "Okay, I'm gonna buy it." That was our conversation. I feel like the girl in Friday 13th Part 7. What is that line? He told me to get my ID. Right? What's that? He asked me if I had any ID, and I said I didn't. And he said you better go get it, and I said okay, and I went. That's basically that's my Dark Knight of the Scarecrow standee.
I love that line.
I do too. But anyway, so I have all kinds of merchandise, like pretty unique merchandise for the film. And if there's a Dark Knight of the Scarecrow lunchbox, somebody needs to give me that. But anyway, that's my background.
Okay, and a lot of great background it was. I got just a few things here. So Nathan, what do you have for us? No. Okay, just a couple of things. I'm sure Justin probably has a lot more than I do. But according to the video horror-rama section of Gore Zone magazine, specifically the winter of '89 and surrounding issues, Dark Knight of the Scarecrow sold on VHS via Key Video for a whopping $59.98 at the time, which adjusted for inflation in US dollars today would be about $125. While writing Dark Knight of the Scarecrow, J.D. Fagelson apparently sent 8 different drafts of his script to Ray Bradbury before his mentor gave him a seal of approval. The film was referenced in the 1998 publication The Handbook to Gothic Literature, and on the subject of quote-unquote grotesques, the book states, "The creation of grotesques and the social isolation of individuals is characteristic both of the Southern Gothic, a form which has been portrayed in films such as Reflections in a Golden Eye from 1967, Last of the Mobile Hotshots from 1970, and The Beguiled from 1971, and of the American Rural Gothic of Dark Knight of the Scarecrow from 1981 and Deadly Blessing from 1982. I read this somewhere a while back, and I can't find the source anymore, so I can't confirm its authenticity, but apparently Lane Smith, who plays Hollis Hawker, was once asked about this film, and he noted that at the time he wouldn't allow Lane Smith Jr., who's also an actor, to watch the film as he thought it would scare the kid to death. And that's pretty much all. Oh, one more thing. Apparently there appears to be a Dark Knight of the Scarecrow 2 on the IMDb, written and directed by J.D. Fagelson. It looks really, 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 really low budget, so I don't know if it's actually real or not. It doesn't even have a year on it, so, and it looks like the last time the page was updated was in February of this year, so I don't know, but that's all the background I have.
Okay, well, thank you. Erik, do you have anything?
Just a few things to add. Tonya Crow, and I'm sure this will interest Nathan and Amanda. We probably know her best. She went on to be Olivia Cunningham in Knots Landing, and she was she was at the center of my absolute favorite Knots Landing storyline, which is where Olivia was on drugs, and then Abby had to take the bathroom door off the hinges and attempt to try and get her off drugs. I don't know why. It was to stop her sneaking in there to do cocaine, I think. And it all ended with her poor little brother, played by Brian Austin Green, who is better known to us as David Silver from 90210. He ends up getting beaten up by drug dealers, and that's what prompts her to quit drugs in the end. Brilliant storyline, and she was really good in it. I don't think she's acting anymore, though, is she, Amanda? She's her IMDb seems to have dried up.
Yeah, I don't know much about her. I do know she made an appearance at some convention. They actually had a Dark Knight of the Scarecrow reunion, and they had Larry Drake and the author, who's Joe's been saying his name properly. I keep saying Feigelson, it's Feigelson. And Tanya Crow was there, and this was maybe 10 or so years ago now. And that's the last I can remember seeing or hearing from her. She's quite beautiful. And she was a really good child actress. So I don't know what she's doing now.
Yeah, she's really good in this. As you mentioned, Strother Martin was originally down to do the role of Otis. I remember him best as the crazed scientist in the film if anyone's seen that, is where he tries to turn Dirk Benedict into a giant cobra. It's a very bizarre movie. It's kind of like Island of Dr. Moreau, 70s style. I thought it was great fun. You mentioned this was aired on Saturday, the 24th of October, 1981. On the Friday, Nightmares in a Damaged Brain and Galaxy of Terror both opened in the cinemas. So you could have gone to see them in a double bill on the Friday and then stayed in on Saturday to watch Dark Knight.
God, what a time to be alive.
I know, take me back.
I know.
I love it. Take me back,
I know,
please.
And 6 days later, Halloween 2 was opened. Yeah, but then also, when you weren't watching the telly or going to the cinema, you could have switched on the radio because Thunder in the Mountains by Toya was number 4 in the charts that week. And Justin, just so you don't feel left out, The Creatures were like way back at number 24 with Mad Eyed Screamer. So there.
That was a single, not an album.
Yeah, no, that's the single charts I'm talking about.
Ah, I see. Okay.
Yes. Yeah, Justin.
So anyway,
so Toya was number 4.
Yeah, it's sometimes when they always say about the good old days, and when they say there were never really any good old days, and you can remember that when start talking about Toya.
The Dark Knight of the Scarecrow, indeed.
Indeed. Yeah. Well, thank you, Erik. I've only got a couple of other things. Jocelyn Brando, as Amanda was saying, was Marlon Brando's sister. She had quite a varied career, but she was also in Mommy Dearest in a cameo in the same year, in 1981, playing the journalist who goes round to Faye Dunaway's Joan Crawford's house, and where she has the fight with Christina Crawford and goes through the glass. Yes, and she says, "Barbara, please," and she,
"Barbara, please,
I'm not one of your fans," and then they go crashing through the glass coffee table.
I love that scene.
Yeah, and that's Jocelyn Brando wrestling to get Joan Crawford off Christina Crawford. So I think, try not to repeat what you said, Amanda, but just a couple of extra things. When I looked up on IMDb, it said it was shot on 35mm, and I'm not sure how at this time you if anyone know, you would, Amanda, were they still shooting films on film for TV back then? Because I know, like the Brian Clemens, the Thriller series from the mid 70s were on videotape. Shot on videotape. So was it unusual for them to shoot on 35mm for a TV movie?
I don't think so. So this is a weak spot for me. I don't think so. I do know though that most of the films, so I guess they shot them on film, and I'm assuming it's 35mm. But then when they transferred them to the different channels, all around the country, the stations, they would send them usually in 16mm. And so, but I assumed everything was shot on film. Still at this point. So the Brian Clemens thing is sort of an anomaly. And there were shot on video TV movies here in America, but they normally aired on the ABC Wide World Mystery, which was a very late night program that was like at 11:30 at night. And they showed a lot of episodes of Thriller on there. So, and then everything that they aired, that they produced themselves, ABC, was also shot on video. But that was really unusual to see in primetime television. And this is early enough that, yeah, I would say, I don't think it's odd that it's on 35mm.
Okay. No, it's interesting because I know we talked about that he originally intended it to be an independent feature for cinema release, and obviously it wasn't shot as it was picked up by CBS, wasn't it, as a script to be made as a TV movie, but originally it was intended to be an independent feature for cinema release. So it'd be interesting to have seen actually what that would have looked like. I imagine it would look very similar, but whether or not it would have been, the violence would be more explicit, obviously we don't know, but I imagine that would have been the case. Apparently that I read, there was a guy, and I can't remember which magazine it was in, but I found a clipping going back to the 2010 convention you were talking about, Amanda, and there was a guy there who'd written a piece for I should have looked up where it was from, but he was a super fan of the movie, and he interviewed J.D. Feigelson, and he said that the first draft was about a young couple going to a remote rural farm community, which is haunted by a ghostly scarecrow. So it was kind of perhaps more of a conventional sort of TV movie type sort of plot, and he said it was rejected. Charles Dunning was. You were talking about him and sort of saying about he was better known as for his more kind of cheerful character actors. And of course, he was also in When a Stranger Calls. But he apparently he was only 36 when he was 36 when he started acting. But one of the funny things this interview with J.D. Ferguson came up was apparently the hat he wore in this, the post office hat, was borrowed from the post office, and they had to give it back after filming. The last thing that I saw, well, two last things. One was there was an interview with Claudel Jones in the San Bernardino County newspaper. And he said at the time the film was a suspenseful drama, and he was quoted saying it's a Hitchcockian thing more than blood and guts.
That's right.
So I imagine that it was kind of with an idea that obviously what was going on in cinema at the time was like Happy Birthday to Me and all the other slasher movies coming out in 1981. He was making that distinction. He said that he hoped it would go on to better roles for him. It would be his big break, and he said it was his second to best ever role. And he was holding out to become a regular in a TV series, which I imagine at the time that a lot of actors and actresses were hoping for, that they would get onto a recurring role in a TV series.
Did he say his favorite role was his best role was She Freak?
No, he didn't mention what his favorite role was. But the last thing was, I think the screenwriter mentioned that the one review that I saw, most of the reviews I saw online were more kind of puff pieces. You know, they weren't really proper reviews. They were more like sort of promotional reviews, I kind of guess, for the release. But he did say that Judith Christ, who was quite a famous reviewer, I'm not sure, was that in?
No, it was the TV Guide. Judith Christ was the critic for the TV Guide, so she would review all the theatricals and all the made-for-TV movies if they gave her a copy of them for TV Guide, and she's pretty much the source for TV movies being reviewed sort of as they came out, with the exception of like Variety.
Okay, well, he said that, after all of that, he said that she gave it a bad review.
Yeah, she gives everything a bad review, but she's also like such a great primary resource.
Of course. Well, she said that the quote he said was, "Who's doing the killings? Who cares?"
I will say she raved about John Carpenter's Someone's Watching Me. Like, she raved about it. And just briefly, I know it's going off topic, but if you're interested in reading TV movie reviews, Judith Christ is kind of your go-to source because she was given access to them more so than even like the New York Times and stuff. But there was a writer for the LA Times named Kevin Hilton, and I'm obsessed with him because he is he really sat down and took these movies at face value. And he also reviewed a lot of B movies that played in the theaters at the time too. So if you ever go through the LA Times archives, look for Kevin Hilton's reviews, because he doesn't love everything, but he approaches everything, like I said, at face value. He doesn't try to compare like Hitchcock to Friday the 13th. He'll look at Friday the 13th as what it is in its cultural moment. And so he's a great resource as well.
I would agree. I mean, you should judge each film on its own merits and not compare it. I mean, I'm guilty of comparing films, obviously, but you know, at the heart, you really should judge a film and a genre on its own merits.
Yes.
Yes. I mean, I'd argue that within the context of a lot of the films we talk about, they are made because of the success of other movies. So there is a place for that comparison. But overall, I think, there's no point like with the actor there saying this is more Hitchcockian, it's not blood and guts, we're trying to distance itself from Friday the 13th, perhaps, or those kind of movies. But so there's a kind of certain snobbery there, isn't there, around movies and horror movies and people's idea of the horror movies. And we talked about that ad nauseum about how the films like Erik mentioned, Nightmares and Damaged Brain, when that was released, that was seen as kind of those films seen as lower than low. In fact, even sort of one step below pornography for some people. So there was a kind of socially at the time there was a stigma about appearing in horror movies. So you could see why some actors might try and distance themselves. But yeah, overall, I think you should definitely judge a film on its own merits. So. Dark Knight the Scarecrow. What was the consensus on the Facebook pages, Joseph?
Well, out of 145 votes, I think that might be our biggest tally yet. It's 100% across the board. Our listener of the week is Dean Eldon, and he writes, absolute winner this one. Very high quality TV movie, and it probably led to Larry Drake getting the job on LA Law, which I would agree because he plays another mentally challenged man on that show, which then got him into Darkman and Dr. Giggles. And that's one thing I was going to mention earlier before I go back to the rest of this feedback here, is that it's interesting that Larry Drake played these two, simple, likable, innocent characters, and then he goes on to play like Durant and Darkman and then Dr. Giggles, and he's so good as the villain. I mean, he's just such a good actor. I mean, so underrated. But anyway, I just want to throw that out there again. He says, where was I? Oh yeah, which then got him into Darkman and Dr. Giggles. There's one you haven't covered yet. And don't worry, Dean, Dr. Giggles is on the horizon because I love that movie. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and of course Patreon, and we appreciate all the patrons. And our email address is info or feedback at thehysteriacontinues.net.
Fantastic, thank you. And I think we need to prepare ourselves for a dark night.
Oh no!
It's my joke of the week. It's so bright and fantastic.
What do you use to stuff the innards of the title character of The Dark Knight of the Scarecrow? Think about it. The Dark Knight. You use a Christian bale of hay. See, it's multi-layered, Justin. You just don't understand it.
Are you fucking off your head? Are you stupid? Stepping in front of the fucking lights. I'm trying to do my scene, Erik.
Yes.
That's my Christian Bale impression.
Very good.
Wow.
Oh, Justin.
Well, I wanted to get that nature thing in, so well, thank you, Erik. Keep trying.
The phony Spanish lover?
Sorry, I don't think your sound bow worked there. But anyway, have we got some feedback? I think we have, haven't we?
We do.
Who would like to go first? Erik, why don't you go first?
Okay, this is from Andreas. He says, hello boys, I first found your show last summer when researching the Eyeball Blu-ray, and a review mentioned that the release featured a commentary by the Hysteria Continues, who have a podcast about slasher films. My interest was piqued. I instantly jumped to iTunes and downloaded the Happy Birthday to Me episode, and from there I was hooked on your show. Was that our very first episode?
It was. And surprisingly, if you can get through that, you get through anything.
I know. All the tinny sound and everything. Yeah. And no
it's
Nathan.
Awful.
And absolutely no Nathan. How can we do a show without Nathan?
He wasn't on the initiation show either.
Oh.
I missed 2 episodes.
Oh. It quickly became my favourite podcast, a really fun format, and you guys all have great chemistry together as well as being funny as hell. Erik always has me trying to hold back the laughter. See, somebody appreciates my jokes. Thank you, Andreas. Andreas goes on to say, I love learning about a wealth of slasher films I'd never known even existed, ranging from the greats to really obscure shot-on-video oddities. I started a checklist of trying to watch every movie before listening on the review to avoid spoilers. Thanks, YouTube. Along with buying slashers on DVD and Blu-ray, my wallet now hates me, and also Justin's book, Teenage Wasteland. I currently have every Blu-ray that features a commentary by you guys and look forward to the ones to come out. Keep doing what you're doing. Thanks for the entertainment and may the hysteria never die. Much love and late night surrender, Andreas. Well, Andreas, we have how many commentaries we have 8? Is it 8?
7, 8, something like that.
7 or 8 Blu-rays are coming out either some stage this year or early next year that will have our voices on them. So you have those to look forward to. Yes, and also there's some interesting titles there that I don't think have had a Blu-ray release. And at least a few of them, well, they're all kind of obviously within our wheelhouse of the slasher movie, but there's some sought-after early 80s slashers in there as well. There is indeed. So, well, thank you, Andreas. That was, I'm glad, the fact is that you started at Happy Birthday to Me, and you made it all the way through, so that is some perseverance, so thank you very much. So, anyone else, Nathan, have you got one?
No.
Joseph, how about you? No. Well, I've got one here. So, long-time listener, first-time feedbacker, if that's a word, and I thought it was far past time for me to sing your praises. Your show is as important to me as the air I breathe, and if you don't hear that enough, maybe you should. I love how the show's evolved from 3 guys on Skype lamenting the sound quality as much as you praise the movie of the week to this polished, concise...
Sorry, Justin. As soon as you said that, there's a Skype breakup on
There was. It was quite ironic. Yeah.
I didn't hear it, actually, so hopefully it won't come out on my bit anyway, but... Foursome, get it? Erik, you are by far the shining light with your jokes and constant sense of humour.
Thank you.
But that's not to disparage the other 3. Nathan, never stop picking the movies the other guys wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole. Joseph, I love your matter-of-factness, and your reviews overall are probably the best of the 4, as you're probably the most critical. Finally, Justin, the host with the most and the driving force behind the show. Hysteria reared me from childhood into becoming a slasher fan, and I can't thank you enough. Okay, I actually did have a question. What do you use for the podcast these days? Is it still Skype? How did you get everything so clean and professional sounding? Well, I asked because my best friend and I did a podcast over Skype and it sounded absolutely horrible, and he only lives 18 blocks from me. I imagine it's a combination of things. So before I finish the email, I think we've gone through various iterations of trying to get things to work. We are currently using Skype for this, but Joseph has done an admirable job over the last year and a half of editing the shows, and we are recording most of us on separate tracks, because although hopefully this sounds amazing when you hear it, well, is there have been Skype dropouts throughout this, but because most of us are recording on individual tracks, that isn't an issue. So Joseph, do you want to sort of chime in there? What else are you doing to
it's just trial and error. You just really get... I mean, dude, I'll be glad to email you some tips and tricks. I'm not really going to go through them all here, but just be patient with it. I mean, you'll get there. Yeah.
So, and finally, I cannot wait for the Dark Knight the Scarecrow episode because I love Amanda. I listened to her and Nate on the TV Mayhem show as well. Have you guys thought of inviting Dan onto the show to talk about official crossovers? So it would be great to have Dan on the show at some point, wouldn't it?
Yeah. You'll have to pick like a Nate film because he excels in that sort of low end horror, like Blood Lake. Yeah.
Oh God, forget that then. We got one's enough already.
No, he loves all that stuff. He's also a huge fan of like all the movies that you guys love, like Final Exam and House of Death, and he'd be great.
Excellent. Well, yeah. Well, hopefully one day soon. So. And finishes up by saying, that's all for now. Love you guys so much. Mark from New York. And stay tuned for the Cinemark podcast, maybe one day coming soon. Something for us all.
Thank you.
Well, I think we've excelled, actually, with Dark Knight the Scarecrow. I think it was one of our most informative episodes, thanks to Amanda.
And me.
Nathan's wealth of background was just astronomical.
Hey, you all wouldn't have known if Toya was number 4 in the charts at that time if it wasn't for me.
I was making fun of Nathan, Erik. Calm your tits.
No, but Justin was making fun of me. You were.
The last 217 episodes?
Yeah. I'm Bubba and you're Otis.
The mind boggles.
And now a word from our friends.
Bad
is full of them. From low-budget crap fests to downright unwatchable. And only 2 men are willing to watch them all. So climb in and take your seat. This is Short Bus Cinema.
Let's do it.
Hey everyone, this is Johnny Krug from Kruger Nation.
And this is Rick Morgan from the Helming Power Hour.
And we have decided to team up and take you where no one has gone before.
We're on a quest to find the world's worst movie, and we're doing it on the bus.
Driving through cult classics in every genre to find holy grail of bad movies.
So if you're looking for something different and more fun than you can stand, then climb on in.
Short Bus Cinema is a proud member of Legion Podcasts.
That's right, yo!
Short Bus Cinema. We love to watch the movies you hate.
Aren't TV movies fun?
You see all these familiar faces, but doing really unfamiliar things. And I think that that's really exciting. And I think that's something important to the history of film in general.
Join Amanda.
There's a lot going on in that scene that is unspoken between 2 men. So I'm just telling you, I think there was a little Brokeback Mountain.
Dan.
I think Therese is a little bipolar. Her voice, it goes from this sort of sexy, sensuous voice to, okay, Ramsey, get out of here. It's like, oh, God.
And Nate.
I love, in like the late 70s, early 80s, the crazier a person got, the bigger their hair got.
As they discuss their favorite made-for-TV movies.
Mr. Hazelrig.
On the Made-for-TV Mayhem Show.
This man came to see him. He never comes to see him at work. What kind of stories could he have to tell him? Tales of his postal delivery.
So, again, thank you, Amanda, for joining us. It's always an absolute pleasure, and thank you for bringing your insight and your knowledge and overall, your passion for these movies to the podcast. It's always a joy, and we always get fantastic feedback whenever you're on the podcast. So, again, thank you very, very much. And is there anything you want to tell us about that you're up to at the moment? You would like to, tell our listeners about?
Yeah, I'm going to do a couple things. Well, thank you guys so much for having me on. I'm going to do a little 1-minute gush, if you'll let me. So, people listening in this current time will know that we're in a pandemic, right? And so, but if you're listening years later, we're in a pandemic. I don't know if that's funny to somebody, but okay. It's been a really, 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 really rough year. And I had kind of dropped off listening to podcasts for a number of reasons. One is that I'm working at home, and it's just, I'm used to listening to them at work and on my commute. And so I dove back into you guys, and started listening to your best of 1981 and best of 1982 on some walks I've been taking. And I don't know that I would have made it through the pandemic without you guys. It's been so good to reconnect with your show. It's always so amazing. It always makes me smile. And there are days when it's the only thing that makes me smile. So thank you so much for your show. Yeah, Erik came on our show and I actually cried on it. So I'm going to try to avoid crying here, but it's meant a lot to me. And I'm so glad that you guys, it's just been such a lifesaver for me during these last several months. So keep going. I'm so happy you guys are so prolific because it's given me so much stuff to just go back to. And I still listen to the old episodes over and over again. So thanks so much for having me on. It means a lot. So, what I have to promote that I can mention is one non-horror related thing. And then I guess they're both sort of non-horror related, but so, I wrote the liner notes for The Last Starfighter, which is coming out in October through Arrow. And that was a really big deal for me because I'm a huge fan of The Last Starfighter. And, I can't even tell you.
You fancy Lance Guest.
I know. And it's amazing to me to be associated with Last Starfighter. Maybe he'll read my liner notes. Not that I mention him, but what's really funny is literally the week before they contacted me and asked me if I'd be interested in writing the liner notes, I made a joke about if I wrote the liner notes to Last Starfighter, it would just be about how much I want to marry Lance Guest. And then a week later I get contacted, and that's not what my essay's about. I want it to be about that, but that's a separate essay for my own private diary.
At the wedding, I wonder who Lance Guest would be.
Wah, wah. That's your joke of the week.
Yeah, wow,
It's
wow.
good though.
That's my joke of the week. It's so brilliant and fantastic.
I wrote a chapter. There's a book called Scared Sacred that came out through a company called House of Leaves Publishing. This is their first publication, and it's about religion in horror movies. And excuse me, I ended up, these aren't necessarily horror, but they are horrifying. I wrote about 2 TV movies and how they portray cults. And the movies I did were Blinded by the Light and something called Can Ellen Be Saved? They're pretty quote unquote realistic looks at cult deprogramming. And I did an analysis of that. And it was really fun for me. And that book is a real labor of love. The intro is by the guy who played Pinhead in Hellraiser. And there's a lot of great writers involved in that book. So if you like religion and horror, look up Scared Sacred through House of Leaves Publishing. And those are the 2 things I can mention right now. And also you can look me up at the Made for TV Mayhem show and listen to me and Nate and our friend Dan Budnick talk about TV movies. Thank you.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Amanda. And we hope to have you back on the show very, very soon. Well, I hope you enjoyed our look back at Dark Night of the Scarecrow. And I guess it's got to time what are we picking for next time? It's a Nathan pick, isn't it, I think?
I'm taking us from 1981 to the mid-90s for the Ice Cream Man.
Ooh.
With Clint Howard.
Yes.
Which
where he serves up ice cream with eyeballs in it.
I've never seen it, so it'll be interesting.
What a jump. What a jump.
Well, I mean, would y'all have ever picked this movie? Maybe, but I think it would have been picked a lot later down the line if it wasn't for me.
Yeah, after I'm dead.
Yeah.
Have you seen it, Amanda?
Yeah, I have. I really enjoy it, actually.
Honestly, I feel like I saw this when it came on like VHS and I'd forgotten about it, so I'll be fair. I don't remember anything about it.
Okay, well, that's for next time. So, and also, what are we playing out with, Joseph?
Well, I'm not picking a song. I'm going to let Amanda do it. So, Amanda, you can pick anything you want.
Okay, so speaking of Eric's multi-layered joke of the week, I picked a multi-layered song. I picked Patrick Swayze, She's Like the Wind, because first of all, Patrick Swayze should have made an entire record. I don't think he ever did. He has like the most amazing voice ever. I love the song. But also, She's Like the Wind, right? So I was talking about how I think that Bubba has a relationship with nature. And I was thinking about how Marilee sort of guides him and she's like the wind, right? So that's where I got the title from when I was thinking about the film. But also, Patrick Swayze had a short-lived TV series called Renegades, which was sort of a precursor to 21 Jump Street. Mm-hmm. Yeah, do you remember? Yeah, I have every episode. I do. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was just gonna say I probably got those on tape as well.
Yeah, I don't have the pilot movie. I've actually never seen the pilot movie, but it turns out the pilot movie aired during the 1981-82 season, and it tied in the ratings with Dark Night of the Scarecrow. So I thought that it was sort of a kind of a fun intermixing of stuff. I found that out later after I picked the song. Yeah, when I was looking up the ratings for Dark Knight of the Scarecrow, and I was like, oh, this works really well.
Serendipitous, almost.
Yes.
Fantastic. Well, thank you. Thank you, Amanda. Yeah, so we'll be playing out with that. And so we'll catch you next time on the Hysteria Continues. So say goodbye to the good people.
Have a great day.
Bye.